This is the Pimax Portal Retro, a sort of variant of the standard Pimax Portal devices, which is more streamlined and focused on retro game emulation. It lacks the VR functionality, 4K screen and detachable controllers found on the other versions, but it's lighter and much cheaper as a result. Whether you wanted to go for the retro model or one of the higher tier models depends on exactly what you want from a device like this. Here at Retro Dodo, we don't really care too much about VR support or having access to high-end Android gaming. We're more focused on retro game emulation and its ergonomics. So, how does the Pimax Portal Retro hold up? If you're interested in the world of handheld gaming and you want to learn more about the games and consoles that influenced the space and turned it into what it is today, then definitely check out our book, A Handheld History, which is now available in retail stores and on Amazon. For full disclosure, we were provided with a review unit of the Pimax Portal Retro to create this video and our written review on the Retro Dodo website, so thanks to Pimax for arranging that with us. Sorry to interrupt the video this early on, but as I was wrapping up the edit for this video, Pimax have informed us that they've sold out of the Portal Retro devices. This is pretty annoying because they didn't tell us that they had limited stock like that, and it kinda means that I've made this video about a product that you can't even get your hands on until they restock it in February. The problem with that though is that by February there's going to be other more comparable devices releasing, like the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, which is probably going to be better value for money. Having said that though, I guess this video isn't completely irrelevant because you can still get the other models of the Pimax Portal, it's just the retro one that's currently sold out. But yeah, I just wanted to jump in here and explain all of that in case anybody watching this wanted to go out and buy one of these and then went to the website and found that they couldn't. But now that I've gone through all of that, we can get back to the video. Take it away, past me. Now I do have to admit, I'm fairly unfamiliar with Pimax as a company. They seem much more focused on VR stuff than portable gaming, so it was a pretty brave move for them to enter the handheld gauntlet, considering that we already have well-established brands such as Anbernic, Retroid, AYANEO, Powkiddy, Analog, AYN and Mayu already battling it out for portable supremacy, and that's without entering the higher-end handheld PC arena with Valve, Asus and Lenovo, all having incredibly popular devices on the market too. But I guess there's always room for another contender if they're offering something new, and to be fair, the Portal Retro is fairly interesting. Talking specs, we've got something that's on the more powerful end of Android devices, not quite being as powerful as something like the AYANEO 2 or AYANEO Pocket Air, but seemingly being in the same sort of ballpark. The CPU is a Snapdragon XR2, it has 8GB of RAM and it features a 4000 mAh battery. The display is 5.46 inches, it has a resolution of 2560 by 1440, which is much higher than a lot of other handhelds, and it even has touchscreen functionality too. As for additional features, it has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi capabilities, it's got 128GB of internal storage, and it weighs 306 grams as opposed to the other models of the Portal which come in at 367 grams. So it's basically got all of the modern features you'd expect from a device like this, and it comes equipped with a good amount of power for retro game emulation, which in theory means that it should be capable of going up to PS2 and GameCube and running most games at full speed. Before we crack on with some game testing though, let's take a minute to look at the design of the Portal Retro, because I think that's where a lot of its appeal is. Quite clearly, the Pimax Portal Retro is inspired by the Switch, and because of that, I think it looks very appealing. It kinda looks like the Switch and the PS5's love child, given its sleek white shell combined with the Switch's form factor. As I mentioned right at the start of the video, the Portal Retro doesn't have detachable controllers. However, all of the other models of the Portal do, and I guess the idea behind this is that you would detach the controllers to play games in VR, which the Retro model doesn't support. So it sort of makes sense that this isn't a feature here. At the same time though, it is a little bit of a missed opportunity that they didn't add in a kickstand so that you could prop it up, connect a controller to it, and effectively use it as a portable monitor. Detachable controllers would have actually been useful in that situation too, but seeing as it doesn't have a kickstand, you're effectively locked into using it exclusively as a standard handheld device. The top and the bottom of the Portal are actually really minimal. On the bottom we've got a USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and stereo speakers, which are nothing to write home about, but aren't bad by any means either. On the top we've got the on-off button, which can be tapped to enter sleep mode, and this little flap which contains a slot to expand the storage with a micro SD card. Why this is hidden away in one of these annoying SIM card style flaps that you need to open with a needle or a specific tool, I have no idea. But at least the option to expand the storage is there if you need it. Weirdly, we've got no headphone jack or HDMI output. I guess the logic here is that you could just connect your headphones to it wirelessly via Bluetooth, but I don't have a pair of Bluetooth headphones, so I guess I'm just screwed. Taking a closer look at the inputs available here, we actually have a whopping 18 buttons just on the front of the device, and that's not including the analog sticks. The action buttons they've gone for here are sort of similar to the ones that you can see on the PlayStation Vita. They don't have a lot of travel to them at all, but they feel good enough, with a subtle click which gives just enough feedback for them to be satisfying. They are glossy though, which makes them slightly slippery and means that they'll get greasy with all of those snacks you're scoffing. Yeah, I see ya. Put those potato chips down, you greedy little goblin. The analog sticks are extremely similar to the ones that you find on the Switch, so you know exactly what you're getting into with those. You've got a lot of menu navigation buttons across the bottom, with your Android buttons on the left, these are the back, home and menu ones, and on the right you've got the in-game menu buttons with start, select and a function button. Something a bit weird is that the Portal doesn't actually have typical volume buttons. Instead, you have to hold this function button down and press these two buttons on the top left to make it louder or quieter. The idea with this though is that these buttons on the top left and top right can be assigned in certain emulators to hotkeys. So you can set these to save states, load states, displaying the frame rate counter, fast forwarding, or basically anything else you want to assign to them. This is actually pretty handy, but it does require the emulator you're using to actually support this hotkey functionality, which not all of them do. Meaning that a lot of the time, these inputs are going to be useless, but when they do work, they're great, and it's not like they get in the way of the normal inputs either. The real major issue with this though is that the D-pad is pretty horrible. It's the same design as the action buttons, so you'd think it would be fine, but using these for directional movement is very awkward. At first, it seems similar to the PlayStation D-pad in terms of each of the 4 directions being slightly separated, but here they're spaced slightly too far apart, which makes sliding your thumb across them a little bit more work than it should be. Because there's no travel to them either, it somehow doesn't give you the same feeling of accuracy that you would normally have. It's just a bit of a mess, especially considering that this is supposed to be aimed at playing retro consoles, which typically use the D-pad as the primary movement input. The shoulder buttons are perfectly fine though. They're very long, which means that you can comfortably hold the device and always have access to them, and they have a nice click to them. The triggers are a bit hit and miss though. I almost feel like they have too much travel to them, and it makes it feel like your finger is going to slip off the back of them constantly. What is great though is that not only are they stacked rather than being in line, but they're also analog triggers, which is particularly important for GameCube games. But that's enough about the hardware, let's move on and talk about the software here, starting with the front end. In terms of the interface, this runs a custom version of Android, which certainly looks a lot more appealing than the standard Android interface, and is more suited to being navigated with a controller. I did find that there probably wasn't quite as much customizability with this though. For example, I couldn't find a way to swap to the Nintendo button inputs rather than the Xbox or PlayStation style. On retro-focused devices like this, I always prefer the right action button to be select and the bottom action button to be back. But on this device, it's the opposite, and I don't think there's a way to swap that. It does look quite slick though, with your downloaded apps and games all being displayed on the bottom, with the most recently used being on the very left. It's really similar to the Switch and PS5 interfaces, so if you're used to those, you'll get what they were going for here. Now let's move on to the good stuff. As to be expected with a device at this sort of level of power, any games from the 5th generation or below are gonna run flawlessly. A unique aspect of the Portal Retro is that it has that 2K resolution screen, which theoretically means that you could upscale the resolution of these games to match that. However, this is a little bit overkill, and after a certain amount of upscaling, you're gonna hit a point of diminishing returns. So I would only go as far as upscaling stuff to 1080p personally. Anything beyond that isn't going to make a huge difference on a screen this small and will only drain the battery quicker than it really needs to. That kinda brings into question whether or not a device like this even needs a 2K resolution screen. I mean, I guess it's nice to have, but if none of the games are actually going to be utilising it, then what's the point? Moving on to the 6th generation consoles though is where the Pimax Portal really starts to shine. Honestly, I wouldn't even consider using this for anything older than this, just because of the D-pad not being great. But entering this generation where analog controls were standardized, things took a sudden turn for the better here. Dreamcast emulation is absolutely flawless. Everything I threw at it ran at a rock solid frame rate with no hiccups whatsoever. This is to be expected considering that the Dreamcast is less powerful than its slightly younger siblings from this same generation. PS2 games ran extremely well, upscaled to twice the native resolution, and sometimes even 3 times depending on the game. Even higher end games like Metal Gear Solid 3 ran with practically no performance issues in the slightest. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 ran at a rock solid frame rate, and Grand Theft Auto 3 was also smooth as butter. The one game where I did encounter stuttering was Ratchet & Clank, which is weird considering that I've gotten this running pretty well on less powerful hardware. But even with this slight stuttering, it was still playable, and I suspect that if I swapped to a PAL ROM, which natively runs at 50 frames a second, I'd be able to play this with no problems at full speed. So overall, I would say that PS2 is fully playable with some very minor tinkering for specific games. GameCube is where this really impressed me. Every single game I threw at it ran perfectly, and because of the analog triggers, we have a device which is extremely well suited to this system. In terms of performance, Mario Kart Double Dash ran flawlessly upscaled to 1080p and at 60 frames a second. Super Mario Sunshine was perfect too, and Super Monkey Ball was spot on, even in the more demanding sections of the game. I decided to push the Pimax Portal a tiny bit more and see what it could do with the Wii. And while 1080p upscaling is too much for it to handle at a full frame rate, dropping it down to 720p works like a charm, with Mario Kart Wii and New Super Mario Bros. Wii performing flawlessly across the board. In terms of portable consoles, Game Boy Advance or below is gonna work perfectly. DS was also perfect, and because of the widescreen display, there's a good amount of room to have both screens visible at the same time without detracting from the gameplay. Plus, the touchscreen that's present here makes it easy to navigate menus in DS games that require that touch functionality. Moving up to the PSP, I found that things worked great here too, but I did only upscale the resolution by 3. Going any higher than that resulted in too much of a frame rate dip. But again, absolutely rock solid performance in this area too. 3DS is always a difficult one to emulate, and unfortunately, even with the power on offer with the Portal Retro, it doesn't run all that well. Games like Mario Kart 7 were playable if you can get over the occasional stutter, but Super Mario 3D Land is completely unplayable due to constant low frame rates and stutters. Overall, I wouldn't recommend this for 3DS. I would say that if you're looking for a device that can specifically play games from the 6th generation consoles, so the PS2, GameCube and Dreamcast, then this could be the device for you. You've also got the added bonus that it performs pretty well with DS, PSP and even Wii, so what's the catch? The Pimax Portal Retro normally costs $299. This is $40 cheaper than the base model of the AYANEO and AYN 2, so it's kind of competitively priced, but a lot of people would probably prefer to pay that bit more and get the more powerful Odin 2. Another thing to bear in mind is that the battery life on the Pimax Portal Retro can leave a bit to be desired. If you run in a GameCube game at 1080p, you're gonna get around 2.5 hours out of it, which isn't the absolute worst, but it's not great either. I'm gonna give the Pimax Portal Retro 6 dodos out of 10. It's a great device, but the lack of a good quality D-pad makes playing any games from the 5th generation below quite uncomfortable. The lack of removable controllers or a kickstand is a bit of a shame, considering this would have given the device way more versatility, and the battery life is below average. However, despite all of these negatives, I can't help but be impressed with its performance with PS2 and GameCube titles. It also looks quite appealing with its Switch and PS5 aesthetic, and while the custom version of Android it uses is fairly basic and lacks in-depth customization, it is quite easy to set up and navigate. But let me know what you think. Does a device like this appeal to you, or have you played on a Pimax Portal before? And if so, what did you think? Drop your comments down below. Also, remember to give the video a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more retro content coming very soon. Remember to check out a handheld history if you're interested in the past, present and future of portable gaming. And I've been Rob from Retro Dodo, and I'll see you in the next one.